Welcome and thank you all so very much for joining us for today's Zoom conference with Professor David Menashri titled Iran's Regional Ambitions and the Implications for Israel. My name is Rabbi Zalman Mendelsohn and I serve as the co-director of the Chabad Jewish Center of Wyoming together with my dear wife Razy here. And it is wonderful to welcome the many of you familiar faces that are with us and those of you who are joining us for the first time. Our mission at the Chabad Jewish Center of Wyoming is to share the beauty, warmth, love, joy, and wisdom of Judaism and our passion and care for our beloved Israel with our community and beyond. Especially during times like this, there is no better way to be able to gather together, unite, and find opportunities to be able to come together and learn about wonderful, important topics. And so we're grateful to have all of you here together with us. In Jewish tradition, we are currently in the process of reading in the Torah each week from the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. The theme of this week's Torah reading is about counting the Jewish people with a census. When counting, every person is included and every person has the same value. 1. No one counts for 0 and no one counts for 2. The message that the Torah is teaching us with this very important idea is that every Jew and every human being has value and needs to be included. Now more than ever, as the country is torn apart by racial and all different types of violence, it is important that we come together and find opportunities to recognize the value in each and every individual and the value that they bring to the tapestry and the color of life. A few housekeeping items before we begin our interview with Professor Menashri. First, I'd like to thank Elon Wood for the time, grace, and effort he has put into making this event possible. Second, I want to share with you 2 of our upcoming events. Dates and times will be announced shortly, so please keep an eye out for our emails or message me if you don't get my emails, so I will include you with updated details as they become available. First event that we're expecting is an event titled COVID-19 in Teton County and its health effect on our community with our beloved local doctor, Bruce Hayes. The next event is music and storytelling with Brandon Goldberg, a 14-year-old award-winning pianist. The schedule for this evening will begin with a 30-minute interview with Professor Menashri. During the 30 minutes, please send in your questions into the chat box that you would like the professor to answer today. Please do not send in questions that are partisan in nature relative to domestic politics in America. We at the Chabad believe in including everyone and hope that this event brings our community together. After the formal interview is over, we will ask as many of your questions that you send into the chat box as possible. As you know, many in the Jewish community are struggling now during these uncertain times, both with COVID and the other challenges that are being presented currently. Please consider making a one-time, tax-deductible contribution to our Chabad Jewish Center so we can support our community with dignity during these difficult times. Since you are all at your computers already, feel free to visit www.jewishwyoming.com/donate to make your contribution today. Finally, it is my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Cliff Sobin, to conduct today's interview. Cliff Sobin is a writer with a special interest in Israeli Jewish history. His most recent book, published this year, is Living in Heaven, Coping with Hell, Israel's Northern Borders, where Zionism triumphed, the kibbutz is evolving, and the pioneering spirit prevails. Cliff has spoken to many groups regarding his mother's Holocaust experience and his books regarding Israel. His written work includes books, articles, and blogs concerning Israel, Jackson Hole, and Maryland workers' compensation. He also sits on the International Advisory Board for ALMA, a research and education center located in northern Israel. Please join me in putting your hands together for a warm welcome to Cliff Sobin to conduct this afternoon's interview. Thank you, Cliff.
Okay. Professor, in 2016, I found a quote of yours that was very interesting and pertinent to your topic today, which is Iran's regional ambitions and implications for Israel. In that quote, you said, almost in each and every case of conflict between ideology and interest won over ideology in Iran. So perhaps you could explain, what is Iran's ideology and what's Iran's interest, both short and long term?
Cliff, before we hear from Professor Menashri, would you be so kind to give him an intro to share a little bit about his bio and his background information?
I'm sorry, Zalman. I thought you were going to do that. So
not a problem at all.
Why don't you go ahead? I don't have that in front of me.
Sure. Professor Menashri is a phenomenal professor who has taught on many different subjects, but his particular area of interest is on Iran. Professor Menashri is an Israeli professor and scholar of modern Iranian history. He's a leading Iranian expert. He's also the founding director of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University. Professor Menashri received his PhD in Middle Eastern history from Tel Aviv University in 1982. He spent 2 years in Iran on the eve of the 1979 revolution, conducting research in Iranian universities. Professor Menashri's research focuses on Iranian politics, society and religion, Shia political Islam, and the history of education in the Middle East. He is currently Senior Research Fellow at the Alliance Center for Modern Iranian History and the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies. He's an internationally recognized scholar and lecturer. Professor Menashri was a visiting scholar at Princeton, Cornell, Chicago, Yale, Oxford, Melbourne, and many more universities. He is also the author of many widely read articles and books. Please join us in welcoming warmly to Jackson Hole and our dear friends all across the world, Professor David Menashri.
Thank you. Should I begin? I'll say 30 minutes to give some opening remarks and then go to the questions.
Well, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that if you don't mind, but I just thought it would be, my real question is, did Zalman's description of your unbelievable bio eat into our 30 minutes or not? I don't know, but that's fine. Why don't you give us some brief remarks to start, Professor?
I'll begin with this issue in a moment.
Okay.
But let me begin with one preliminary remarks. I think it's important. It's I think that we are missing discussing Iran, mainly in the media, is the lack of sufficient understanding what is Iran. I think Iran is much more complex than people think. It is not white, it is not black, it's many pictures and many colors in between, and I think in my talk, this will be clear. I'll give you one thing that I was surprised. I'm studying Iran over 40 years, and last year I've been notified by a friend that he found my book in Tehran University translated into Persian, and I didn't have a clue that they translated the book. Unauthorized, of course, they don't believe in all kind of rights and so on. And I was doubly surprised that I saw that the book about Iranian education was published in cooperation with the Supreme Council of Cultural Revolution. It is the most radical Islamist organization in Iran. And they said it's the best book, or one of the best books written about Iranian education. Of course, they deleted any reference to me being an Israeli. Even the dedication to my wife, it has been eliminated. But I think that the fact that they translated the book and endorsed it and introduced it to their people, it means that this is not what we are used to, or people are used to when they think about Iran. Iran is not only about missiles, nuclear weapons. Iran is a culture. It's a pre-Islamic culture we all know from the days of Cyrus the Great. It has been it is the first empire in history. And then we know it from Islam and Shiite Islam, and now with its encounter with the West. A word about the West, and many people will be surprised. I think that the Iranian entity is based on three pillars. The Persian culture of pre-Islam, the tradition of Cyrus the Great. The second layer is Islam and Shiite Islam. And the third is Western culture. Western culture is part of Iranian identity today. People ask, can the West go back to Iran? I can tell you there is no way that you can take the West out of Iran. For example,
Professor, if I may interrupt, why don't we'll try to get back to that, but let's try to hone down along with the topic that we're talking about, their ambitions today, is when you mentioned Iran's ideology, what did you mean? Were you speaking globally or about the leadership ideology?
I suggest that I was offered to speak 30 minutes. I can speak 10 minutes, 5 minutes, but let me just say
okay. Fair enough.
And I've spoken about Iran and universities and fora so many times, but I think that it will give you the answers in a minute.
Okay.
So what I want to say here that there are different layers of Iranian identity. Here I want to begin with three questions that I think are important in understanding Iran and its policy in the region and the policy towards the United States. One is, everything today is Islamic. We say Islamic revolution, Islamic terrorism, Islamic state, Islamic whatever. Was it this revolution Islamic in its origins? And here I want to say, I think that in my view, this was a revolution that ended up with an Islamic regime rather than intention of the people. People did not intend, I lived in Iran that time, the intention was not to create Islamic state. The goal of the people was to provide better life for their children. And it was based on two main issues, welfare and freedom. There is no greater freedom in Iran today that used to be under the Shah, and there is no better welfare for the poor people of Iran. The second question is, to what degree the revolution is Islamic in its ideology? And here goes back to your question. There is no one Islamic ideology. And we ignore the fact that throughout ages, the interpretation of Islam has been changed. In Islam, mainly in Shiite Islam, Grand Ayatollahs, the great authorities, have the right to reinterpret the principles of faith. And that's what they are doing. You have to follow, as a believer, you have to follow a living Ayatollah. And this living Ayatollah is giving you the guidance. It doesn't matter that the chief leader is Ayatollah Khamenei or Khomeini. You follow your own Ayatollah. Now, I'll give you one sentence that was said by one of the intellectuals in Iran already in the 90s. He said, there is no one interpretation of Islam. There is no one interpretation that is better than the other. There is no final interpretation of Islam, and there can be no official interpretation of Islam. Namely, even an Islamic regime cannot tell you, this is the true principle of faith. You have to follow this line or that line. There is more kind of freedom of interpretation, mainly in Shiite Islam. And as an example, I would say that when Ayatollah Khomeini came to power in 1979, there have been 7 grand Ayatollahs in the country, the 7 great authorities in Islam. None of them supported Khomeini. The leading Ayatollah in Iran went under house arrest. So that has to go with ideology and practice. And Khomeini, already in the first decade of the revolution, he said something that actually they are doing today. If the interest of the state would require, you can abolish all principles of Islam, the basic prayer and Hajj and all others. You don't have to do things. You can close the mosques if interest, if you save human lives. And basically what they were doing it with the corona just a couple of weeks ago. They shut down mosques, which was very harmful for many people, but many people and the government, Islamic government, ordered it, as did the Minister of Health in Israel, who is an Orthodox observing Jew. And the third question is to what degree the policy of Islam, of Iran today conforms with the ideology with which they came to power. And again, it has to go to ideology and practice. In opposition, you do whatever you want. You say whatever you want. When you come to power, you have to run the country and feed the people. Then you have to be more pragmatic. So even the most radical elements over time become somewhat more pragmatic. Now, how fast you can go to pragmatism, in what area, in what rate, speed, on these there are different groups in the country. One of them we usually call pragmatic, liberal, reformist. The other we call conservative, extremist, radicals. To sum up this part, I would say the majority of the people are supporting the pragmatist elements, but almost all authority is in the hands of the conservative radicals. And that's dictates the policy towards each and every issue. Let's take the issue of Israel. The president of Iran said recently that the problem of Iran is not Israel and it's not the United States. The problem of Iran is unemployment, inflation, the floods, and the currency deteriorating. Of course, he was attacked by the other group. The president, the foreign minister, wants to renew dialogue with the United States, even after President Trump has withdrawn from the treaty. So it's, you can see here that there are different attitudes, different ways. There is one thing that they both share is the hatred to Israel. More radicals and more pragmatic.
So that opens up an interesting question, Professor. Is there a difference in the regional ambitions between the two groups?
Yes, there is difference. Many people, the more pragmatic elements, and again, I will have to emphasize you, these people are very nice, and I tend to prefer them over the other, but they don't have the power to deliver. They have been kicked out from almost all power in the country. Now they think, the more pragmatic elements think, why do we have to go all the way to Syria? What is for us in Lebanon? Why we are in Yemen? And if you, those who have followed demonstrations in Iran in the last, until January, people went to the street and said, why should I care about Gaza or Lebanon? My life is dedicated to Iran. And you could see at the same time demonstration in Lebanon and in Iraq asking the Iranians get out from our country. So of course there are, but I think that's not the main issue. The main issue is that right now we have the extremists, radicals, conservatives having power, and they want to revive the Iranian empire, either from Cyrus the Great, going from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, or going back to the Islamic ambition. It's not only to export the revolution to Shiite communities, which they already have done very successfully, not only to Islam, but only to mankind. Just look at today. The 5th Iranian tanker with oil arrived to Caracas. or close to a port in Venezuela, carrying oil to help the Venezuela, the government there, the people there. So why Iran, with the poverty that they are suffering, with the unemployment, with all the difficulties, they have to go and extend their hand that far? Many people are not blind. And that's why I started my talk saying that for many people in Iran, the aim of the revolution, I think the vast majority of the people, the goal of the revolution was not Islamic rule. The goal of the revolution is to make sure that their children have better life. And when I was watching the video clips from the streets of Tehran and Qom and other places, and see people, young people and old people dying in the streets, and no one can help them. It's
so
hard.
Professor, does that divide create any opportunities for Israel? The United States, the prior administration, was castigated for not supporting, I think it was the Green Revolution or what have you. And since our talk has implications for Israel also, does that divide create opportunity, or is there nothing that Israel can do with that?
Well, you are taking me to distant places. Of course, there is an opportunity. But unfortunately, Israel is not good in using opportunities. We always claim that the Palestinians have never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And here we have with the Iranians. I tell you, I am not lover of the Islamic Revolution, but I respect the people of Iran. I don't think that the people of Iran wake up in the morning and the first question that they ask themselves is, how can I destroy the state of Israel? That's not true. Just today, we had from the foreign ministry, and I had an interview with a prominent person in the foreign ministry, that we have a broadcasting in Persian. We have recently a big number of Iranians, not only Jews, Muslims, who ask, how can we come and live in Israel? And they are not afraid to go to the social media and express such intentions. The government hates Israel because usually when you have ideology and interest, when they clash, I said that they prefer the ideology. An ideological ruler doesn't come to power and say, well, what can I do today against what I promised to the people? They come and they want to do what they pledge to do. But when there is a clash between your dogma to the realities of life, you prefer usually the interest. Now, in the case of Israel, there is no clash between ideology and interest. Ideologically, they think that Judaism is a religion. It is not a nationality. Jews don't have the right to exist as a nation, as a state. Certainly not in the Middle East, in the midst of the Arab Muslims. Of course not with Jerusalem at its capital. They hate Israel because of its close relations with the United States. And I don't know if they hate America because of Israel or they hate Israel because of America. They think that we control America. If you hear about the Jews control the world, thanks God they didn't blame us for engineering the COVID-19, but they blamed America for this. Now, practically, why should they withdraw from this principle? If you want to be the leading power in the Middle East, you have to raise the flag of Jerusalem. They are taking advantage of the Palestinian issue to promote their case. While Israel was negotiating with the PLO, Iran was against negotiations.
So what do you see the Iranians doing over the next year or two in the face of the COVID crisis and also with the potential of Israel acting unilaterally on the Trump peace plan? Where do you see Iran's leadership going?
First, it is very difficult to say where Iran will be going after the corona. No one knows. The people went to the corona stage angered, with anger against the government. Just cheated them. They didn't provide. And if you remember, they hit an Ukraine airline and tried to cover it. They tried again to cover the corona. They announced the first 2 sick people of the corona, February 18. The same day they announced that 2 have died. This was there from December. So the people are angry. There are so many unemployed. There are so many difficulties facing the people. So I think that it depends which mood they will come back. Now it's about the opportunities for Israel or opening for Israel. We had 2 windows of opportunity with Iran. One was 8 years of Iran-Iraq war that I believe you remember. The second was 8 years of the Arab Spring from 2011 to 2019. We did not really come out with a plan for the long run, what we do with our Arab nations. What we managed to do, because of the Iranians hate the Sunnis more than they hate the Jews, so there was an opportunity for Israel to improve relations with the Muslim Sunni countries. But the Muslim Sunni countries, and today there was a demand from the United Arab Emirates calling Israel not to annex the West Bank. So for the people of the Middle East, the issue of Palestinians is important beyond the Palestinians themselves. It is the symbol that they identify with them, and it's a major issue. So we did not know what to do. Iran presents to us 2 major challenges. One is their proximity to Israel in the north, in Syria, Lebanon, also Gaza, also the West Bank, but mainly in Syria when they came so close. And the second is the nuclear. When I speak about proximity, there is also the issues of missiles that they are having, and they have surrounded us with missiles and rockets that it's very dangerous. Israel knows how to deal with this military challenge. And the attacks by Israel recently has forced the Iranians to somewhat withdraw to farther away from the border of Israel. It doesn't mean that they have forgotten their mission to fight against Israel, but at least at this stage of the corona, they went back. Their struggle is against the United States. The main enemy of Iran is the United States. We are the convenient enemy. Right. It's easy to attack us by words or even by missiles, but your main enemy that you are scared from is the United States.
So, Professor, do you see the cyber attack done recently, reportedly, against Israel from Iran, the confrontation with American Navy, the bellicose statements, is that part of a plan, or is that more for domestic reasons?
No, this cannot be a domestic issue. This was crossing red lines. Attacking with a cyber attack on our water resources, it's a very, very serious strategic change. And from here, it can be only worse. Israel, with a cyber attack on Bandar Abbas port, told them, listen, we are watching you. The question is if they will listen or they will continue to do it for domestic or for regional or other purposes. So these are the challenges that we have. For one, I think that Israel is weak enough to fight Iran on the nuclear issue. The nuclear file should be handled by the United States. This is the only country that can solve such a big issue. on our regional issue, we can handle. And we are doing it pretty well. If we want to solve the problem in the region, and you are hinting it twice to this, the West Bank, I think Israel is going to face a serious challenge in the near future, when the government is going to, for the annexation of Judea and Samaria, or parts of them, even 30% of them. It's going to have problem from both two sides. First, from the extreme right. Second, and that's what I'm more worried, from our Arab neighbors, King Hussein of Jordan. For him, it's going to be devastating. The Arab countries with close relation with Israel, either we have peace with them, like in Egypt, or countries that we don't have peace, but we have better relations, like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf small states, they are going to be devastated by such a state. But that's, again, you say that you don't go into politics in Chabad, and I don't want to go into Israeli politics here, because these are issues of politics, and strategically speaking, Israel is now having a major problem of defining its priorities and strategics. Until now, in the last more than 50 years, since 67, we occupied these territories in 1967 war. It was a wonderful war for Israel. We thought that the Messiah has come and all problems have been solved. It's not really. Since then, we didn't come with a strategy. I know that we didn't have partners. It takes two for tango, you said, but in this case, we don't have even one.
Professor, speaking about partners, there's now an unwanted guest in the Middle East, which is Russia. What role is Russia playing in complicating matters for Israel with regard to Iran? Or is it playing a moderating role?
Well, Russia has been, I don't think that we can complain about the Russian policy in the short run. We may worry about their plans for the longer run. The Russians arrived here, and no Israeli airplane, military airplane, can take off without being noticed by the Russians. It is limiting the freedom of operational freedom for the Israelis. But they have been, I would say so far, very understanding to our needs. The Russians are there. They promised to stabilize situation in Syria and then make sure there is a regime change in Syria. I don't see this happening. But so far, Russia is playing this game. They are good with the Israelis. They have good relations with the Iranians. They are selling arms to the Iranians. When the United States is withdrawn from the nuclear deal, they are against. They want to keep the nuclear deal. So they have major differences that we have, but I think that so far in the short run, they have been okay with us, partly also maybe because of their interest. I think that's everything with them is interest. Also, Prime Minister Netanyahu has very close relations, and so does Lieberman, who was Minister of Defense until recently. So there are good communication, good way, and it's always good to have someone who is around to make sure that things don't go out of control. And what is my fear in this region? Wars begin often without any of the parties willing to go to war. Again, we had in 1967. I was a soldier at that time. And Israel didn't want war. President Nasser didn't want war. We went to war. With this proximity of forces of Israel and the Iranians, or mainly Iranians and the Americans in the Persian Gulf, things may go out of control. 2 weeks ago, 19 Iranian sailors from their navy have been killed by what is called in the military friendly fire. I don't know what is friendly with this fire, but they shot on their own people. If there is a mistake and they shot on Americans, it's oy vey.
So, Professor, since we're probably running close to our deadline, I'm going to ask you a question. It's not a political question because I'm going to make you king. If you were king of Israel, what would you do now vis-a-vis Iran?
Well, my name is David, but I never thought I'd be in position of King David. Vis-a-vis Iran, you have to be, I'm not going to give you any specific answer, but I can tell you, you cannot always threaten. You have to show also the carrot. I know that every day they said that to Israel. I know that we did not cut relations with them, they did. But show them the carrots, show them what is good for them. I think what we can do, what we have done with the Shah, I don't think the days of the Shah will return. They can benefit from our technology. They already benefit from our technology. Whatever they use, the smartphone, whatever, they use Israeli technology. They use Waze, they use Israeli technology. Health services. Things could have been much better. But I'm not child anymore. And I think that as long as you have the supreme leader in Iran, which is so stubborn and unwilling to change his mind, and you have your American government that is having their own demands from the Iranians, there's a huge gap between them. And I think that for better Israeli-Iranian relations, we have to take care first that there is better American-Iranian relations.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Zalman. Do you have time for one more question, or are we done?
Let's move along now to Q&A from the community because we would like to be able to get some questions in from people. Darcy, who is following this presentation on Facebook, asked the following question, Professor. And those of you who have questions, who are on Zoom with us, you can ask your questions directly to the professor. We will allow you to go off onto the microphone, off of mute, and ask your questions directly. Just let us know if you have any questions. Galaxy S8, we will get to you shortly. Are there other countries allied with Iran in these ambitions? Are they providing resources? If you can talk to Darcy's question, Professor Menashri, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I don't think there is anyone any country that I know that is really joining Iran with its ambitions. For example, if they want to be the leading country, hegemon country in the Middle East, none of the Arab countries would like to do it. So they think that Iran is the center of universe, or at least the center of the Muslim world. And they think that the duty of all Muslims is to defend Islam. I don't think the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Egyptians, the Turks, they want to do it. They get their support primarily from China, who is backing them more than any, because of its own interest, economic interest. And they also supply them with masks and all the medical material. They get their support from Russia in a way that Russia helped Iran to keep Bashar al-Assad alive. From time to time, Turkey is helping them, but these are all not because of sharing the vision that this regime has, but rather bilateral relations and pragmatism to continue their business with them. One country needs oil, Iran sells oil, that's could be basis for cooperation.
Thank you very much. Professor Menashri, your fantastic. All of your responses and answers have been very enlightening. Thank you very much. We are going to go to Galaxy S8. If you could unmute yourself so you can ask the professor a question, and if you can identify yourself, that would be great too.
Hi, this is Rafi. Thank you so much, Professor, for the presentation. My question is about how the power is divided in Iran between the official military and the IRGC. Does the Ayatollah only control the IRGC, or does he, in effect, control the official military as well? And which of the two is causing the problems in the Straits of Hormuz? Is that the Ayatollah, the IRGC, or the official Iranian military?
Well, first there is the army. And they created what you call revolutionary guards, but in Persian, the name is Guardians of the Revolution. These are the guards who protect the revolutionary regime or the government. The distinction between them is blurred today because gradually the revolutionary guards have given much more responsibility. What you see in the Persian Gulf in confronting the Americans is the Revolutionary Guard Navy. The Revolutionary Guards is Navy, they have Air Force, they sent satellite to the space. Can you imagine Iran under the Corona and under the sanctions, they managed to launch a satellite. So yes, the most power are in the hands of the Revolutionary Guards. Regionally, Revolutionary Guards had the Quds, Jerusalem Corps, headed by the man who was assassinated, killed in January 2nd or 3rd, depends where you are, wherever you have been, January 3rd in Iraqi time, General Qasem Soleimani. And this Quds force is responsible for, it is the operational arm of exporting the revolution beyond the gender. So I think that today, the political, economic, military power in Iran is generally speaking in the hands of the Revolutionary Guards. See what happened. 2 months ago, the Revolutionary Guards were suppressing the people of Iran when they went to demonstrations. Today, they became the savior, saving the nation. They are cleaning the streets, they are distributing masks. So they are trying to build on the Corona to rehabilitate their image, and they are doing it. But if you think about military force in Iran, which is police, which is intelligence, which is Air Force, which is Navy, you have to speak about the Revolutionary Guards. And these are all, both of them are under the control of the Supreme Leader.
Thank you for that. And if I may, I have just one really quick follow-up question. You mentioned that Vladimir Putin wants to see regime change in Syria. I was wondering if you can elaborate on what the source for that is, because it seems like he's been defending Bashar al-Assad for a while now.
No, he didn't. Did I say regime change? I'm not sure I said regime change, but anyhow, he wants to, I think the main idea was to change or showing to Assad the way out, but I think that today he will compromise on somehow that allowing greater freedoms to opposition groups so I think that if we went back from 2013, when Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapon and then against the opposition, and then they spoke about the changing the system. I don't think they speak today about changing the system. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We have a question here on the chat. And for those of you who have questions, please send them in. We're going to try to get to as many as possible. Do you, from Rena, I guess that's Schwiger, if you can come onto the mic and ask your question, that would be great. Please ask your question.
Hi, Professor. I'm really enjoying your lesson here. Thank you. I'm wondering if you see another revolution in the future of Iran, that the people will rise up against the Ayatollah and try to do away with him. I'm just wondering that.
Rina, I was trained as a historian, and we really don't make predictions, certainly in the Middle East, which is very difficult. But I try and answer your question about the next revolution. I think that one thing I would say, with President Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal, JCPOA 2015, he said that with the sanctions, the economy will collapse, and after the economy, the regime. This did not happen. Iran is the only country in the Middle East in which people have changed politics. Iran had two big revolutions in the 20th century. In 1906, they had constitutional revolution, and 1979 Islamic revolution. If you follow Iranian events, you can see how often they go to the streets, put their life in danger, and demonstrate. And they called death to Khamenei. They called all kinds of slogans against the regime. They blamed the regime of using the name of Islam to act in un-Islamic way. Now, to go to revolution, I happen to think that ultimately, if there is a change in Iran, it's most likely to happen from inside. And such mass movements can begin with no a priori signals. One day, you can see the people going to the streets and moving on. We did not anticipate the Islamic Revolution in 1979. We were not ready for President Sadat, this was not a revolution, to come and visit in Jerusalem in 1977. There are so many things that we cannot see, but this one day can happen. When this will happen, you will have many experts say, well, I knew the sign was on the wall, don't trust them. No one really knows. Do you know how the Intifada in Israel started? The first Intifada? By car accident. So sometimes you do one action and the reaction of the people is such that moving you. I think that is difficult to expect the people of Iran today to go to another revolution. Why? Because 41 years ago, they went to the revolution. And what is the result? It's worse than it used to be. And then you ask yourself, am I ready to go to another revolution? There is no opposition. There is no alternative ideology. There is no alternative leadership. So it's much more difficult. It is possible? Yes. It is likely? I think yes, but it may take some time.
Thank you very much for that wonderful question. Aaron, do you have a question? You just came onto video. Do you have a question, Reb Aaron?
I don't. It's very interesting, but I'm sorry about that. No.
Okay. Do we have any more questions that anyone wants to ask? If you have a question, just come on. Don't be shy. We aren't going to bite you here. You're too far away for us to do that. So please feel free to come on, unmute yourself, and ask your question. We would love to hear any further questions that you have.
Hey, Professor. I was wondering, do you feel like Ismail Ghani will be able to fill in Qasem Soleimani's very large shoes? And in which regards do you feel that he won't be able to step up to the plate? And who do you think will be able to fulfill those, previous accomplishments?
I'm glad to hear all these questions about the future. But I learned something when I was young child, and we were giving my grandmother difficult times. She always used to say that these days, even the future is not what it used to be. And I think the Middle East these days have never been as it used to be, because we don't know what it used to be. We don't know the future. As Doris Day was singing, if you listen to women singing, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future is not for us to see. But I think that the cemeteries are full of people who didn't have anyone that could replace them. That's my lesson from history. So for every person, there is a replacement. There is someone who will come. We don't appreciate it because the number two usually doesn't behave like number one until he is number one. If you understand what I say. Like, for example, the deputy president of Egypt in when was that President Nasser passed away? 1968, I think it was.
No, it was in the 70s.
The president of Egypt was Nasser, and Sadat was number two. Go to the newspapers from that time and see what people have written about Sadat, that he can, no way that he can enter into the shoes, big shoes of Nasser. He did. Within a year or two, he came with new policy. He went to war with Israel. From his own perspective, he was successful in 1973. So Ka'ani is not the natural successor. Well, he is natural because he's deputy commander for 17 years, I think. But if the idea is to have relations with Arab countries, he doesn't speak Arabic. And you can live without speaking Arabic, but the Iranians don't speak Persian, and there is difficulty. Qasem Soleimani was something else. He had a charm, he looked good, he was always behind the scene, he was not arrogant, and he was loved by the supreme leader. He was his child. When Bashar al-Assad came to visit Iran a few months ago, and this shows also the relations between the camps in Iran, the foreign minister didn't know. Can you imagine? The president of Syria is coming to meet with Iranians. The foreign minister doesn't even know. He was not invited to the meeting between Bashar al-Assad and Khamenei. Who was there? Qasem Soleimani. Recently, he started Ka'ani, his successor, trying to do some negotiations with the Iraqis. The results are not clear, but I can tell you one thing. Today, the Iranians are speaking with the Americans on Iraq, on Yemen, on Afghanistan. The world is strange. They hate each other, they speak against each other, but I think that what we have today, that both countries don't want to go to clash until the elections in the United States. The Americans, I think the President Trump is not, in my view, doesn't want to see a war, mainly now with the corona and now what you are going the few last days. There is no appetite to go to clash with the Iranians because he may risk his re-election. And the Iranians don't want to go to war because they think it will play to the hands of President Trump to be re-elected. And they are waiting for Biden. So no, I'm not going to politics, it's the Iranians going to your politics. So they want to speak with each other right now to try to calm down tempers. But you know what they are doing is to the contrary. Every day that I open Iranian newspapers, it's harsh statements about the Americans, and I hear the Americans. Luckily, in the last 2-3 days, there are other things that Americans are engaged with, or other things that there is no much time for the Iranians. I want Rabbi Mendelssohn, with your permission, maybe to add, if this is the end, but I don't mind to stay to other questions, is about this previous question about popular movement or removal of this regime or the collapse of this regime. Some 20 years ago, an Iranian student in the midst of demonstrations against the regime, an Ayatollah wrote a letter, an article in Iranian newspaper in which he say that he asked the students not to cross certain red lines and to obey through Islam. A young student wrote back a beautiful article, and you know, we professors learn also from our students. And this student asked, no, Ayatollah so-and-so, you tell us not to cross red lines, but would you please tell us what are the red lines and who decides what is permitted and what is forbidden? And he ends his article in a beautiful sentence. He say, the problem is not that we, the young people, are crossing certain unidentified red lines. The problem is you, the clerics, the orthodox radicals. In a one-way street, you are driving against the flow of traffic. And that's the picture that I see in Iran. If this is going to be soon into clash and another revolution, I don't know. Let me say another word to conclude, maybe helping you to. The Iranians are not against, the people are not against the United States. They adore the United States. I heard from people who have been to Iran and then to Israel, say there are the numbers 2 liberal city in the Middle East after Tel Aviv is Tehran. Go to young people's parties. They drink, they sing, they dance. But what I wanted to mention is what I heard from a friend of mine who was one of the hostages that the American were held in the American embassy in 1979 to 1981, 444 days. And he said that before they occupied the American embassy, there have been graffitis on the walls of the American embassy. And one of them said, Yankees go home. And another Iranian wrote in Farsi under it, and take me with you. And that's how much they hate the Americans. So we have to make distinction between the regime and the people, and within the regime, all kind of different camps. So I know it's complicated, it's complex, but so it's the country. The country with a history of over 2,500 years, with so many regimes and cultures have been exchanged, changed from time to time. They have culture. There's different culture that we see in other places in the Middle East. They have technology. The universities are very good. Look at their success in many fields, in math competitions that they have, Olympics they call it, or physics Olympics that they have, they beat the Israelis. And we think that we are most educated and sophisticated and mathematicians in the world. So they have different colors. And that's why I started with this, to tell you there are many faces. And I don't know if you want to join me or one word, another thing. We didn't come to the Jewish issues. And with all this hatred to Israel that I see in Iran, what really is devastating is their anti-Semitism and denial of Holocaust. And we have seen it twice in the last month. First, the attack on the grave of Esther and Mordechai in Hamadan. And the second, couple of weeks ago, in the Jerusalem Day, when they wrote slogans about the final solution referring to Israel. I tolerate everything they can say about the state of Israel, but if you come to the final solution, I think they are touching a very sensitive nerve and they should stop it.
Thank you, Professor Menashri. Do we still have time for another question or two?
For me,
Yeah.
I'm working until 4 o'clock in the morning, which is another 6 hours.
Okay. We'll stay with you. We'll keep you company for a little bit.
Yes, I'm glad. Who is this young baby who wants to ask the question?
Do we have a question? If someone has
I have a question.
Yes, if I may follow up, You kind of mentioned Iraq in the previous conversation. I was wondering, Iraq was, historically a majority Shia country that was ruled by the minority Sunni Saddam Hussein, who almost represented the Sunni world. But when the United States came in and created democracy, that kind of brought the Shiites kind of back to power. A while back, it was almost rumored that the border between Iran and Iraq was almost demolished because they became such close partners. Since Iran and Iraq are both Shia and now kind of controlled by similar ideologies, obviously not directly. But Professor, how do you feel like the changes in Iraq have affected Iran, and what do you feel future changes in Iraq can affect Iran, and how U.S. involvement in Iraq kind of interacts with all of that? Thank you.
Well, I didn't expect so educated questions to hear tonight. Not because you are in Wyoming. I think that people usually that listening don't have this background that you have been really showing that you have. I tell one general issue. If the Iranians are asking themselves, or will be asking themselves, which is the country who has done the greatest services to Iran's national security, my answer is Iran. The answer is United States. That's the country who did the services to Iran and national security. In 1991, American-led coalition destroyed the military power of Saddam Hussein, the enemy number one of Iran. In 2002, America removed the enemy number two of Iran on the east side, the Taliban of Afghanistan. In 2003 that you refer to, they went all the way to remove Saddam Hussein, and actually on the two wings of Iran, they could breathe. They had space. The two enemies have been removed by what they call the Great Satan. Now, here another cautionary remark. The Shiite of Iraq are Shiites, but they are not Shiite, they are Iraqi citizens. I think it's very difficult to see how, if they identify with Iran that much. I can tell you for sure, the number one Ayatollah in Iraq, Ayatollah Sistani, who is the greatest Islamic authority in Shiite Islam, of Iranian origin also. He lives in Karbala, in the holy places in Iraq. He is against Khamenei and his policies. So it is not that because you are Shiite, they are all brothers. But you are right. And here is the place to add another actor that we didn't mention today. It's the Islamic State, Daesh. When the Daesh came and they were vehemently anti-Shiite, the Iraqi Shiite became more Shiite and close to Iran. So you are right, there is growing power of the Shiites in Iraq, but I think they want to make a distinction between Iraq and Iran. They don't want to be, they've until now have been disadvantaged in a Sunni-ruled Iraq. They don't want to be a minority in a Persian Shiite state.
Thank you very much for the question. If anyone has not yet asked a question, we'd like to be able to hear from you first.
I have a question.
Already asked questions. Larry Elberger, if you have a question, please go ahead and ask.
Hi, Professor.
Go ahead, Larry, ask your question.
Professor, you noted that the economic pressures that America has brought on Iran recently has not overthrown the regime, but it seems to be widespread reports that it has forced them to cut back on their support of groups like Hezbollah and others. Do you agree with that?
Yes, of course, of course. It's, and here is the difference between strategic step, plan or tactical. in tactical ways, they have even withdrawn a bit, significantly, I would say, from Syria. They went farther south, away from the Israeli border. They are limiting their support to Yemen, to the Houthis in Yemen. Of course they did. They cannot continue. And I'll tell you what, just to illustrate the problem. Iran entered the Corona era with terrible economic situation, with the sanctions, with unemployment, with devaluation of the currency and so on. So I would call it side issues, side health issues, like in the Corona. I have side issues, my age. So with all these other, come all the problems. Imagine three things: more sanctions since the Corona, oil price dropped more than 50%, unemployment is paralyzing the country. What else you need? The problem, what I mentioned, that, you know, I'm not young anymore. I remember the days from the early days of the revolution. They will always say in 6 months, this regime would be overthrown. I lived 41 years under this Islamic revolution, and every day we hear that these prophecies about this collapse of this regime. Those who say that this regime would collapse would ultimately be right. At this stage, I wonder if they are not prematurely right.
Thank you very much for that question and fascinating answer. Noam, it looks like you might have a question. Please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question, Noam.
Okay, hi. First of all, hello to everyone and good to see you again. Second, sorry for the baby. Very interesting lecture. And I have a question. There is an Hebrew say that says, I will say it in Hebrew, Haba leorgecha ashkem leorgo. So how it's related to these days? How do we put it in condition in this day? We need to ignore it. We need to do a different way. Does it work like that? What should we do? And I will mute it again because my baby will do noise. Thank you.
Now, this is a tough question, that if someone is coming to kill you, you should go first and kill him. I don't know. I'm sure that the rabbi has a better translation for this. You know, the question is when you decide that the time is come to act. From your accent, I believe that like my accent, we are coming from the same village. And not every time that you see a danger, you go to war. We are a small country. We have been in few wars. Now, let's say that the Hezbollah in Lebanon is having 1,000 rockets. That's the time you decide that that's the time to go and kill the one who wants to kill me? We didn't do it. You wait and wait and wait, and maybe you will have to fight in worse circumstances. So I don't think that we are a peace-loving country, you know it. And every Arab country who came and extended hands for friendship, we have been there. So I think that it's up to our politicians. And here, there is no difference between left wing or right wing. We have a military who is accepting, of course, orders from the government and doing what the government commands them to do. The time, it depends on one. For example, Bibi Netanyahu wanted in 2012 to go and attack the nuclear sites in Iran. The head of the Mossad the head of the domestic security, the chief of staff, refused to do, not refused, they argued against it, and he didn't do it at the end. So there is discussion inside, and trust me, when wars come to wars, and there is no choice, Israel will go to war. But Israel can win only wars of no choice. Until now, when we went to war that was out of choice, we were not successful. 2002, 2006. No, sorry, 1882, 1982, and 2006. That's, but the question is when you decide that there is no more choice, and it depends on the interpretation, it depends on the evaluation. Iran so far is not showing any signs that immediate Iranian direct threat to the state of Israel. They want to be there, they are not there yet. I'll tell you what is my fear. Although I refuse to do any comparison between the state of Israel today or Iran today and Nazi Germany. You will never hear from me that the year is 1938 and Iran is Germany. I think we should keep the Holocaust out when we speak politics. The Holocaust should be on the shelf and we should not mention its name in vain. But this is a country that has gone, or nation that has gone through a trauma of World War II. And no prime minister is permitted or allow himself to accept that Iran will get nuclear weapon under his watch. Especially so when you have in Iran such radicals that they trust that the God has sent them to do A, B, and C. I'll give you an example. Ahmadinejad was president of Iran. He went to the UN. There is nothing more that the Iranian presidents love than visiting New York. They have only one opportunity a year during the General Assembly. So I don't know if this year they will be there, but they have been there every year. The president of Iran, ultra radical, goes there and speaks and goes back to Iran and sits on the floor speaking with an Ayatollah. And he said the 27 minutes that I was talking in the General Assembly, no one whispered. It's like Ma'amad Har Sinai. No voice has been raised. All eyes were glued to me because he said, people told me, and I noticed myself, there was an aura of light with God protection about my head. People who speak like this should not get close to the nuclear weapon. And that, I think, is the nuclear red line for Israel. And I hope that the world will be with us to prevent such an eventuality, because it's going to be bad for all sides involved.
Cliff, do you have one more question that you wanted to ask?
This is what we call in America a softball question, an easy question. Professor, you were there 40-some years ago as a young man. If you were back there today as that same young man, how would day-to-day life today in Iran differ from what you saw when you were there 40 years ago?
I've not been there, so I don't know really, but we watch what's going on. I tell you. First of all, I'm sure you all agree with us. It is not fair to make comparisons between today and 40 years ago. You speak with some Iranians and say, yeah, you know, we now have a subway, a metro. We didn't have 40 years ago. Of course, in 40 years, the world developed. Many things have changed. I think two things for me are essential and unfortunately have not been improved. One is the gap between the rich and poor. The rich have changed but the gap remained. And you see the luxury houses in Iran. I can send you a few video clips. Unbelievable. The palace of the Shah was not close to what you see in Tehran today. Go to the mausoleum of Imam Ayatollah Khomeini. They put packages of gifts to the poor people to come. And this made many people angry to see the richness of this mausoleum. Billions, tens of billions of dollars have been spent to build it. And you see thousands of packages for poor people. And someone wrote to the grandson of Ayatollah Khomeini, this is not something that the revolutionary guards who have done it should be proud with. This is a shame for your family and for our nation that people are starving in this country. And there is, you see the richness of the grave of your grandfather and the poverty of the people. So this has not changed. The other thing that did not change is the lack of freedom, unfortunately. One of the friends there asked about 2003, bringing freedom to Iraq. Freedom you cannot export. It's the idea that we will bring freedom from America. They thought in the past that you can bring parliamentarism to Iran, to the Middle East. Well, they built parliaments, beautiful houses of parliament. The question is this parliament allowing people to speak? In Iran, 80 members of the outgoing parliament were not allowed to run for parliament because they were blamed to be corrupt. And someone asked the Iranian newspaper, is the parliament is the place that makes people corrupt? Because 4 years ago you approved them to run. Now you say that they are corrupt, so they have been corrupted while members of parliament. So the people are smart. People are not stupid. So it's so you have buildings of parliament, you don't have freedom. Still, I would say that in Iran, more than in countries in the Middle East, you see some glimpses of free expression. I was giving a lecture to our veteran diplomats in 2004. I remember the year because of the question I was asked. And I spoke about relative freedom of expression in the time of President Ahmadinejad. And the question came from one of our veteran ambassadors, and he said, you speak about freedom of expression, but in the last 5 years, 100 liberal newspapers were shut down in Iran. So how you explain this dichotomy? I told him, first, show me another country in the Middle East which has 100 liberal newspapers to shut them down. There is no. So the fact that there are 100 liberal newspapers speaks for himself. But I asked this question to one of my Iranian friends and say how he's, explained his dichotomy between some kind of free expression and heavy suppression. And he told me, David, they tell you there is no freedom of expression in Iran. That's not true. We have freedom of expression. What we don't have is freedom after expression. And I think this is the situation in Iran today. The people, even if they can express themselves, you don't know when they will come and get you. So this is, I think, the two things I'll be missing. I would love to go to the restaurants, not in the days of Corona, but I've been, jokingly, some friend of mine invited me to come to Tehran. But they tell us in one condition, we'll send you a one-way ticket. They tell me, one-way ticket, I don't come to Tehran. Not even round trip.
Final question, Professor Menashri. People on this video conference have enjoyed your insight, your knowledge, your wisdom about the current situation in Iran and its implications for Israel. If someone would like to either read more or connect with you going forward, or in some way be able to benefit from this Zoom meeting into the future, how could they get in touch with you? What do you recommend they read? Are there any films that you suggest? Is there anything that you can guide us going forward if we want to be able to stay on top of this subject as best as possible, ideally together with you? What would you recommend?
First, a very short piece that I have written. It was published today in Hebrew. They are translating it. It will be published, I believe, in 2-3 days. I'll email it to, I have your email. I have Elon's email. I'll send it to you, and you can distribute it. It's about the current situation. But whoever wants more questions to expand knowledge about not only about Iran, about the Middle East, and if I don't know it, we have a group of people very expert in their field, working on all countries of the Middle East. And I think that one advantage that we have in Israel when we deal with the Middle East is our experts are focusing on topics. In American universities, and I've been in some of them, even if the better universities, you don't have 2 people working on Iran, 2 people working on Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Lebanon and so on and so forth, or on oil or other thing. And as a good friend of mine told me, I'm teaching from Prophet Muhammad to Mubarak. They are teaching the whole history of all the Middle East. And people of Israel, we are educated more to read. Today, I think what I find unfit with our young people and some of our leaders, that they tweet all the time. Somehow I was teaching in one of the better universities recently, and I thought that influencing the students. They don't have patience to make arguments which is complex. They need answer in 2 words. So whoever wants to 2-3 words will go to the Twitter. Whoever wants more in-depth knowledge, let me know and I direct you either from my own writing or my colleagues' writing. It was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me, and the floor is yours, Rabbi.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Menashri. Please put your hands together. That was fantastic. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Cliff, for the great questions that you asked early on. And even if the professor was a little bit uncomfortable with some of them, we like to get under people's skin a little bit here and there. So great job on that. And really, very, very special afternoon for us here in Jackson. Professor Menashri, please, next time you're in America, please come visit us in beautiful Jackson Hole. We would love to be able to host you for a Shabbat dinner and thank you in person.
I go usually to New York, but the place that I like recently more is Los Angeles, that the Iranians call Tehrangeles. It's so many Iranians.
Yes. Thank you, Professor, very, very much. And thank you all so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you all.